I applied 11 study techniques that will help me to study and remember forever.
I'll be trying 11 study techniques and I'll be trying it with reading a topic from microeconomics from each of these textbooks.
And this is what I discovered. I discovered that there are some study techniques that actually work best.
The main characteristics of a modern oligopolistic market is that there is close interdependence among them.
And there are some that didn't.
I've been reading this for the past 15 minutes now. I just test myself and I discovered that I could not remember anything from what I'm reading.
And on this video,
I'll be checking with each of these techniques whether I'll be able to remember what I studied for the next few days.
I'm going to be demonstrating how I applied these 11 study techniques, the pros and cons of these techniques, and which one actually works
So
best.
please stay with me as I go on in this video.
Apply this very first technique, which is simply reading the material ordinarily.
Try reading just by simply reading the material. I'm not going to take notes. I'm not going to do any other thing. I'm just going to read it passively. Then I will check whether I actually remember what I've studied or not. So now, right now, I'm reading a topic on oligopoly. I'll be looking at the definitions of oligopoly. I'll be looking at the types of oligopoly, and I'll be looking at the characteristics of oligopoly.
Everything was going on fine when I was reading it. I was able to understand, but then
I've
would
been
not
reading
remember
this for the
anything.
past 15 minutes now, and I just test myself and I discovered that I could not remember anything from what I'm reading just by simply reading it. And of course, I understood some things that I've been reading, but then it's not really sinking in like that just by simply reading it, because I discovered I'm not engaging with the material. Like I said, I'm testing it because I didn't engage with the material. This is a textbook. I didn't bother to write something down, and
There was no retention happening at all because immediately I left, I discovered that I could not remember a single word. That means I didn't actually actively read it. I was reading it passively. I was just reading it for the sake of enjoyment. And if you read like this for your exam, you're going to fail because you can't read for your exam as if you are reading a newspaper. You have to be able to engage with what you are reading. And that is what I discovered. Simply reading what you are reading is not a good way of studying because I have tried it and it didn't work well for me. It creates this illusion of knowing that, oh, everything is going on fine. But immediately I close the book and I try to remember, nothing is happening. If you are reading like that and you didn't do the relevant things and you go to the exam hall and you try to test yourself, you won't remember anything because you didn't apply some specific technique, which I'll be discussing later in this video. Instead of simply reading, which is not an active way of studying, one particular thing that has helped me to learn actively is Brilliant. Brilliant is a great place where you can learn actively by doing with interactive lessons and practice questions in programming, mathematics, data analysis, and AI. Brilliant is a learning platform which is designed to be effective. It can help you build understanding from ground up with practice questions. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, which is super effective than simply reading or watching lectures. Brilliant is such a great place to build your critical thinking skill through problem solving and not memorizing. As such, while building real knowledge on specific topics, you also become a better thinker. Brilliant has been such a great place for me to build foundational knowledge in coding and learn with real world application. And it has really helped me to get familiar with Python and start building program on a daily basis with built-in drag and drop editor. Brilliant's comprehensive range of math courses are built for learners like you, whatever level you are, whether you want to brush up on fundamentals or challenge yourself on advanced maths concepts. In addition to the essentials, you also find lessons that align with the most useful and applicable mathematics concepts, which includes algebra, calculus, and vector. To get everything Brilliant have to offer for free for a full 30 days, please visit brilliant.org/Abayomi Awushika or click the link in the description. You get 20% off on all annual premium subscription. Thank you, Brilliant, for sponsoring this video.
Today's day two, and I tried merely reading, and it turns out that it didn't work. So I'm going to be trying highlighting, and today I am going to be reading a concept in macroeconomics.
Then I highlighted and I discovered that I could not even remember what I highlighted. But there are some things that happened when I was highlighting. I felt good when I was highlighting because I felt, oh, I know this thing, let me just highlight. One disadvantage of highlighting is that when you highlight, it feels like you know it, but then you don't, because when you leave and you want to remember what you highlight, you will not remember anything. And highlighting can be subjective because what you think is relevant and you underline it, it might be irrelevant to the person that is testing you. And by the time you are doing the exam, you discover that what you highlighted didn't even surface. Highlighting is not a good way of studying and it is ineffective. I have tried it, it cannot work. And also, highlighting can cluster your book because when you highlight too much, you cannot even pinpoint which one to focus on and the most important thing that you need to read. Everything just looks the same all along because you've highlighted everything. So there's no point highlighting. You're just wasting your time. Then I discovered that, okay, I've highlighted, I've done everything, but let me just try this. Why can't I just read repeatedly
Today,
whether
I'm
I'll
going
be able to
to
remember?
be setting questions for myself on what I need to read, and I'll be reading it repeatedly for the next 1 hour to see whether I'll be able to remember. So let's get into it.
I set some questions for
I've set
myself.
the questions already. As you can see, these are the questions because I'll be focusing on those three things as I read.
Then I repeatedly read that topic over and over and over again. Then I went back to the test. I discovered that I could only remember just 1% out of what I read. And why is this? A lot of students do it, and which is what you call cramming. Most students do it when the exam is fast approaching, especially a night before the exam, and you feel like you want to pack everything into your head. You might try it and feel like if I just read all this, I'll be able to remember the next day. But then I discovered that I was stressed when I was doing this. The fact that I had it in mind that I'll be tested after the reading, I was not comfortable. One thing that I discovered is that I didn't consolidate the information because if you consolidate and you try to rest, it will move into the long time memory and you'll be able to remember forever. And that is one study technique which you should not try because I just tried it and it didn't work for me. Now, this particular technique that I want to discuss next is relying on your
So right
notes. I
now,
made a
I'm going
notes,
to be studying a topic and I'll be taking notes while I'm studying.
then I looked for certain questions on a particular topic. Then I was trying to read that
So
notes
I
to
want to see
answer
whether
those
I'll be
questions.
able to understand and remember what I studied just by taking notes of what I studied.
What I discovered that when I made those notes and I was trying to read the notes, I thought I was reading it quite fine. But immediately I finished reading, I discovered that I could not answer some things very well because the notes was limited in context and in content. And in fact, I didn't go in depth when I was making these notes. A lot of students make this mistake, most especially when your lecturer gives you some notes to study. You might think that the notes is like the alpha and omega and everything you need to study. But I'm not saying you should not read your notes. What I'm saying in essence is that search for other textbook on that particular topic and read different things about that topic to give you more depth and more understanding, and you'll be able to answer some specific questions that you'll be asked in the exam. But if you rely on your note alone, it's a bad technique. Something I tried and it will not work for you. Another technique that I decided to apply also is active recall. I've discussed it in a lot of my videos, but then I just felt let me just practicalize what I've been teaching. Then I decided to apply it. And there are ways I applied this. I applied it by free recall using flashcards. I applied it also by drafting questions. You can use any of these two. But then I used free recall. But when I was in school, I applied flashcards. And sometimes you can set up questions for yourself. Instead of rereading, like I explained earlier, this is what I did. When I was reading, I was drafting questions from what I was reading
I have
into a
four
small
cards
piece
here
of paper.
and I have questions with them and answers at the back.
Then
So
I
I'll be
tested
trying to
myself
read
from
the
what I
question,
read.
then I'll try to report without opening it. So now
I read the
the first
question
one is
aloud.
what is the main characteristics of modern
Then I
oligopolistic
checked the back of
markets?
the
And the
flashcard.
answer
Then I read
is
the
the
answer.
main characteristics of a modern oligopolistic market is that there is close interdependence among competing firms.
Then when I did it for like 5 minutes, then I took few seconds break in between. Then after some minutes later, I read the question to myself. I tried to forcibly recall the answer of the question. It was really hard for me to
Now,
do
what
it.
is a cartel?
Then
A cartel is an organization. Cartel
I
is
needed
an
to check
organization.
the answer again. Then I checked the question again. Then I also tried to recall it. Then I discovered that it got easier as I do it. Then it got to a point that when I recalled the answer, it was not really clear, but then I still tried it
The
again.
main characteristics of a modern oligopolistic market is that there is close interdependence among them. Let me check whether I'm correct. There are, mm, I just missed the word, competing
The fact
firms.
that the more I did it, the more it becomes easy for me to recall that particular information. That was when it dawned on me that applying that particular technique while you're studying is better than simply reading what you are reading over and over again. When I tried it
This
the
is day
next day, I
two,
forgot
and I'll be studying the flashcards again.
it. Although it was there at that point when I was trying to check up the question,
In
read
the
the
first question,
answer
it is
at that
called the
point, it
concept of oligopoly. Now, oligopoly is the
felt
market of
easy.
the
But then I tried to do it the next day. I could not remember again. And I felt, come on, which other technique can I apply? Then I tried doing the same process every single day for the next few days. And I discovered that the more revisited that particular flashcard, going through the question and going back to the answer, the formation becomes strengthened as I go on over the day. I did it the first day, I did it the next 2 days, I did it the next 4 days, and I did it the next 10 days. I discovered that this information becomes, it gets stronger as I go on. Immediately I want to forget, I was able to read it again and be able to remember. That was how I discovered that it's even better than simply highlighting or cramming or just rereading because I was able to remember some things vividly. What I'm trying to tell you is that active practice active recall. It's not that you do it just one day and you just stop. You have to do it at interval. Like I said, you have to space it. You do it today, then you study your flashcard tomorrow, then you study another set another day. Then you just I discovered when I did it, I discovered that as I go on, there are some cards that became easy to me to study, and there are some cards that it was very difficult for me to recall. Then I study more of the difficult ones and leave the easy ones. After some days, I went back to the easy ones. And that was how I was able to note some things that I was trying to read at that point and I was able to remember. But the fact that I'm saying that active recall is better than simply reading doesn't mean that is the best you can apply. So stick with me as I continue on this video. I set questions from what I've studied and even from past questions. I draft these questions and I was trying to test myself. And I discovered that the more I test myself, the more I'll be able to know what I don't know and the more I'll be able to adjust. And one thing I discover is that the more you test yourself, the more you reduce the time of you staying on something and reading it over and over again. Because if you set an exam condition for yourself and you test yourself, you can easily focus on specific things and go back again and try to adjust and go back in testing yourself. So, testing is another way of reducing your study time, help you to remember very well, and also it will save you a lot of time. And by the time you get to the exam hall, you won't find it very difficult to recall because you've put yourself in an exam situation before. And it's just like you are doing revision anytime you are studying. So testing can be one of the techniques that can work well for you at any point in time. But I am not saying it is the best technique you can apply. Aside from the other technique that I applied, I also applied this technique, which is called elaborative retrieval.
Now, elaborative retrieval is just simply connecting ideas from different sources. So instead of just reading from this source, which is the microeconomics textbook, I have two textbooks here on microeconomics.
One thing I discovered is that after I applied this space repetition and active recall, I could not still understand some things, but then I could remember some information vividly. I could not still write some things and explain in my own words because I literally train myself to remember the exact words. But then when it comes to explaining in my own words and doing some things, I could not do it. When I was applying this elaborative retrieval, I didn't only rely on the books that I was reading. I sought out different things. Then I checked different materials.
What I've discovered from these two textbooks is that this particular textbook is actually focusing on oligopoly, which is the market of the few. But these textbooks, this particular one narrowed down on duopoly, which is another form of oligopoly. It narrowed down on just two firms, and there was nothing like this in this textbook. As a result of this one is giving me an in-depth understanding of what the concept of oligopoly is.
To connect ideas because that is what elaborative interrogation is. I try to connect ideas. I try to connect it to what I already know before. I try to relate to what is it in the real life. And I discovered that things became more interesting to me and became more understanding to me. It was when I applied this technique I discovered that I could actually apply this to understand. Then I could actually use active recall and space repetition to interrupt the forgetting process over time in order for me to retain the information. I also tried to apply this Feynman technique. Now, of course, I don't have anybody around to teach. I decided to explain it to myself by making a video. So I made a video explaining a particular concept. Now, this is what I now discovered that blew my mind. Now, no, I talked about active recall and I talked about space repetition. Now, I discovered that aside from you using flashcards to write a particular question and writing the answer at the back, I discovered that teaching can also be the best way you can actually be able to study and remember forever. Because while I was teaching, I discovered that I could recall some specific things. I was forcing myself to recall some specific things as I was going on. And I was able to discover my lapses. I was able to discover things that I didn't know. And by the time I now went back to read, I was able to fill up those gaps. Then I went back to explain it again while I was making a video. Then I discovered that teaching can actually help you to fill up gaps aside from you using flashcards, you using free recall, teaching can help you fill up gaps because while you are teaching, you are trying to see what you are able to explain well. And by the time you go back to your notes, you discover that there are some missing points that you missed. And when you look at it and go back again, you are trying to fill up those gaps. So teaching is another way of you testing yourself and see what you are actually missing out and be able to fill up those gaps that you discover that you are not able to explain well. And even when I was in school, I applied this teaching very well because it's actually helped me in different situations. Most especially when I was teaching my colleagues, I teach them mathematics because I studied economics. So there are some mathematical theories or mathematical problems that I needed to teach. I discovered that the more I teach them, the more I discover what I know and what I don't know. And by the time I get home, I'll be able to, I treated those things that I know and I come back to teach them again. So it becomes solidified. Without teaching, I didn't know which one I knew and which one I don't know. And in fact, one thing I discovered again then was that they were asking me some specific questions, then it questioned my knowledge. Then I was able to discover whether, then I discovered that I could not answer some questions when they asked me. I discovered that, oh, I need to treat this thing more because I didn't know it. So teaching actually helped me adjust along the way. And I was able to actively recall and I was able to fill up gap. I was able to space repetition. I was able to do a lot of things while I was teaching. And this is when it dawned on me that teaching is actually the best way to study and remember forever. Because when you are teaching, you are applying everything at once. You're applying active recall. And if in fact, when you are now teaching on a daily basis to someone, you are applying space repetition, you are applying elaborative rehearsal, you are doing so many things at a time when you are teaching. And this is when I was able to discover that teaching what you learn is the best way to study and remember forever. Because it is what you say that you remember every time. You keep saying it over and over and over and over again. And you'll be able to check those lapses and go back and study and do it over and over again. So I found it very, very effective when I was in school, and I still find it effective until today. So anytime you want to read at any point in time, try to teach it to someone. I will employ you and I will advise you to apply teaching at any point in time, because it is the best way you can study and remember anything at all at any point in time. So I hope you got so much value from this video. If you did, please like the video and also subscribe to the channel. You can also check this other video on why you will not remember anything you study no matter how much you try. In that video, I broke down some things that you need to take notes while you are studying at each stages that will not help you to remember anything no matter how much you try. So thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next one.